I 35F just had my engagement party a few nights ago, and what was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of my life turned into a complete nightmare. I've spent the past 15 years building my career in corporate finance, and I finally thought I had everything figured out: a successful career, a loving relationship, and a bright future ahead. My fiancé James, 38M, and I have been together for 4 years, and this party was meant to celebrate our love with close family and friends before the big wedding. When James proposed 6 months ago, I was over the moon. He did it during our weekend trip to Vermont, getting down on one knee at sunset by a beautiful lake. It was perfect, just like our relationship had been. We'd met at a charity gala where we were both representing our respective companies. He runs his own successful tech startup, and I remember being impressed by how humble he was despite his success. We hit it off immediately, sharing the same drive for our careers and desire to maintain a work-life balance. We spent months planning this engagement party. I wanted everything to be perfect, from the venue, a beautiful converted industrial space with exposed brick walls and crystal chandeliers, to the carefully curated menu featuring dishes from significant moments in our relationship. I spent weeks coordinating with vendors, choosing the perfect flowers, white roses and blue hydrangeas, and selecting the right music to create the perfect atmosphere. James was supportive throughout, helping with decisions and keeping me grounded when I started to stress over small details. For some context about my relationship with my stepsister Melissa, 40F, we've never been close because she has this habit of blaming me for everything that goes wrong in her life. This pattern started when our parents married 12 years ago. At first, I tried to build a relationship with her, but it quickly became clear that she saw me as competition rather than family. If she lost her job, somehow it was my fault. If her boyfriend left her, I must have said something to him. Last year, she even blamed me when she got passed over for a promotion, claiming I must have said something to her boss because we belonged to the same country club. It's like she has a vendetta against me and loves to pin the blame on me, even for things that are completely out of my control. The worst incident before this was during her own wedding 5 years ago. She accused me of trying to upstage her by wearing us too fancy a dress. It was a simple blue cocktail dress, and she made such a scene that I ended up leaving early. Our parents always try to smooth things over, saying she's just insecure and that I should be more understanding, but there's only so much one person can take. Despite our strained relationship, I still invited her to my engagement party. I wanted to be the bigger person and try to smooth things over, at least for the sake of our parents. When Melissa told me she wouldn't be able to make it because she had other plans, I wasn't surprised. I was actually relieved, thinking the evening would go smoothly without any drama. The night of the party started beautifully. I arrived at the venue early to make sure everything was perfect. The lighting cast a warm glow across the room, the flowers created elegant centerpieces on each table, and the champagne was perfectly chilled. Our guests started arriving at 7, and soon the space was filled with the happy chatter of our closest friends and family. My mother was beaming with pride, and James's parents had flown in from Seattle especially for the occasion. I remember feeling so content, watching James chat with my colleagues, seeing how well he fit into every aspect of my life. Several of our friends gave heartfelt toasts, sharing stories about our relationship and wishing us happiness. James's best friend from college told the story of how James had called him the day after we met, saying he'd finally found the one. My best friend Sarah talked about how she'd never seen me happier than I'd been these past 4 years. That is, until about 2 hours into the party, when Melissa decided to make her grand entrance. She literally burst through the doors holding her 5-year-old son Tommy at shoulder level, as if she was making some kind of statement. Everyone stopped what they were doing and just stared at her. The band even stopped playing mid-song. My heart immediately dropped to my stomach. I knew instantly that things were about to go south. Tommy looked confused and uncomfortable being held up like that. He's always been a shy kid, and I could see him trying to hide his face against his mother's shoulder. I tried to ease into a greeting, hoping to maybe pull her aside and talk to her privately. But before I could even say hello, she pushed past me, son still in hand, and went straight to the front of the room. She grabbed the microphone from the band's singer and announced that she had something to say. What came next was like a scene from a bad movie. She launched into this dramatic speech about how James had actually been her baby daddy, and that he had abandoned her and their child to be with me. She claimed they had been together when James and I first started dating, and I had somehow swooped in and ruined their relationship. I stood there frozen, my champagne glass nearly slipping from my hand. Sarah quickly stepped up beside me, putting a steadying hand on my arm. How does one even react to something like that? I was trying my best to process what she was saying while everyone just stared at me and James. But that wasn't even the end of her speech. She pulled out her phone and started showing people texts that she claimed were from James. She said they had been talking around the time I met him. Then she held up a folded piece of paper, which she said was a paternity test proving that James was the father of her child. I watched in horror as she walked around the room, showing these proofs to our guests. Some of them awkwardly looked away, while others leaned in to get a better look. The whole room went dead silent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The paternity test she was waving around looked legitimate, but none of it made sense. James had never mentioned anything about her or a child. As far as I knew, they had barely met twice, once at a family barbecue 3 years ago, and again at my parents' anniversary celebration last year. I knew Melissa had been married for a while, and everyone assumed her ex-husband was the father of her son. I looked at James, hoping to see him laugh it off or immediately deny everything, but what I saw instead made my blood run cold. He was standing there, his face pale, his hands gripping the back of a chair so tightly his knuckles were white. He wasn't saying anything, not denying it, not defending himself, just silent. My mother had sunk into a nearby chair, her hand covering her mouth. My stepfather was trying to approach Melissa, presumably to stop her, but she kept moving around the room, her voice getting louder and more hysterical. Tommy was crying now, clearly frightened by his mother's behavior and the tense atmosphere. Why would she wait 5 years to bring up the true paternity of her son? And why did she need to do it at my engagement party? I know she's had a history of blaming me for everything wrong in her life, but she's never embarrassed me to this extent before. Still, since James and I were the hosts of the party, I decided to stay as calm as possible. Melissa continued, saying that I knew all along that they were together and that I didn't care. She called me manipulative and selfish. She said I was a backstabber who stole her only chance at happiness. Her words echoed through the sound system, making them seem even more accusatory and harsh. Then she started making even wilder claims about other horrible things I'd supposedly done to her. She talked about how I had spread rumors about her at her job to get her fired, and how I had forced James to leave her by blackmailing him. She claimed I had orchestrated her divorce, that I had been plotting against her for years. None of it made any sense, but she kept talking, and as I looked around the room, it was clear some people at the party were starting to believe her. I could see the doubt creeping into people's faces. Some of my colleagues were whispering to each other, and even some of our closest friends looked uncertain. The beautiful evening we had planned was unraveling before my eyes, years of relationship trust dissolving in minutes. At that point, I'd had enough. My hands were shaking, but I managed to keep my voice steady as I walked to the front of the room. I told her as calmly as I could that none of what she was saying was true. I explained to everyone that she was bitter and upset because her life hadn't gone the way she wanted, and she was trying to blame me for her problems, just like she always did. This is supposed to be a celebration of love and family, I said, my voice cracking slightly. Instead, you've turned it into a platform for your unfounded accusations and drama. I think it's time for you to leave. But Melissa wasn't done. She grabbed Tommy again, who was still crying, and held him up. Look at him, she screamed. He has James's eyes. How can you deny him? How can you all just stand there and let them pretend this isn't happening? Finally, my stepfather managed to reach her. He gently but firmly took Tommy from her arms and handed him to my mother. That's enough, Melissa, he said quietly. You're scaring your son. By that point, the whole vibe of the party was completely ruined, and honestly, I was too upset to keep it going. I told everyone to call it a night, thanked them for coming, and asked the venue staff to help me wrap things up. The guests started filing out, some avoiding eye contact, others giving me sympathetic looks or awkward hugs. Some people tried to stay behind to comfort me, but I just wanted to be alone and figure out what had just happened. I had James leave earlier too because I needed to think about everything that had just transpired. The sight of him standing there in silence during Melissa's accusations kept replaying in my mind. Sarah offered to stay and help clean up, but I sent her home too. I spent an hour sitting alone in the now empty venue, surrounded by half-empty champagne glasses and wilting flower arrangements. Everything that was supposed to represent our perfect evening now just looked sad and abandoned. When I finally got home, I confronted James about everything Melissa had said. He tried to avoid the conversation at first, saying we should wait until morning when we were both calmer. But I insisted, I needed answers now. After some back and forth, he finally admitted that he did have a fling with Melissa about 5.5 years ago, but it was before we got serious. He swore that it was just a one-night thing and that he had no idea she got pregnant or even thought the kid could be his. He seemed genuinely confused about the whole situation and insisted there was no way he was the father. I didn't know how to process this. James had never once told me that he knew Melissa. I mean, he'd met her when I introduced her as my stepsister. How had he not even once mentioned being with her? Was he really that good at hiding things, or was I just blind to the truth? I couldn't sleep next to him that night, so I went to the guest bedroom. The bed felt cold and unfamiliar, just like everything else in my life suddenly did. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every interaction between James and Melissa, trying to spot signs I might have missed. Unable to sleep at all, I decided to do some research into paternity testing in general. I needed to understand what kind of test Melissa had been waving around at the party, whether it could be faked, and what the process of getting one actually involved. As I scrolled through medical websites and legal resources, my thoughts kept drifting to Tommy. Had I really been around my own nephew for 5 years without knowing he might be my fiance's child? Eventually, I decided to contact Melissa's ex-husband, Matt. I knew it might open up a whole new can of worms, but I needed answers, and he deserved to know what was happening. I waited until it was an acceptable hour in the morning to call him, and when I finally got through, I told him about what Melissa had said at my engagement party. To say Matt was livid would be the biggest understatement of the century. His voice shook with anger as he told me that he had always had doubts about being Tommy's biological father, but every time he brought it up, Melissa would shut him down. She would cry, accuse him of not loving their son, and make him feel guilty for even questioning it. He said he was going to demand a paternity test immediately, not just to find out if he was Tommy's real father, but also because he was done paying child support if the kid wasn't his. For context, Matt and Melissa had gotten divorced 2 years ago because Matt found out she had been cheating on him with multiple men. However, she had sworn up and down that he was Tommy's real father, even during their divorce proceedings. Matt wanted nothing to do with the child anyway because Tommy would have been a constant reminder of his failed marriage, but Melissa essentially dragged him into court, and he was ordered to pay quite a large amount in child support. I've been paying $2,000 a month for a kid that might not even be mine, Matt said, his voice bitter. Do you know what she told me when I questioned the amount? She said Tommy deserved to maintain the lifestyle he was used to. Meanwhile, she's been buying designer bags and going on weekend trips while I can barely afford my rent. Now I'm sitting here, completely lost about what to do next. James has refused to take a paternity test, and while I understand that he can do whatever he wants, it's definitely straining our relationship. He's terrified about what would happen to us if the child really is his, but I think the relationship is already in freefall just knowing that he was with Melissa. Every time I look at him, I wonder what else he might be hiding. This morning, I found myself looking at old photos of Tommy on Melissa's social media. Now that I know to look for it, I can see some resemblance to James, the shape of his eyes, the way his mouth turns up at the corners when he smiles. Or maybe I'm just seeing what I'm afraid to see. This whole situation is driving me crazy. Did I do the right thing by getting Matt involved? Some of my friends think I should have just convinced James to do the paternity test and left Matt out of the picture so Melissa would at least have had the resources to raise Tommy. But others say I did the right thing by exposing her lies. I'm really struggling with this decision. Should I push harder for James to take the paternity test? Should I just walk away from this whole mess? What about Tommy? If he really is James's son, do I have some kind of obligation to him as his potential stepmother? The engagement ring on my finger feels heavy now, like it's weighing me down instead of lifting me up. Any advice would be greatly appreciated because right now, I feel like my entire world is falling apart. Everything I thought I knew about my relationship, my family, and my future has been thrown into question, and I'm not sure how to move forward from here. Update 1. Hi everyone, thank you all for your comments and support on my original post. I need to share some developments that have occurred over the past week, and they're pretty significant. After much heated discussion, James finally agreed to take the paternity test. His initial resistance turned into anger when I insisted, claiming I was choosing Melissa's drama over our relationship. However, when I explained that this wasn't about Melissa anymore but about trust and honesty in our relationship, he reluctantly agreed. The process of getting him to actually go through with it was like pulling teeth. Every step of the way, he found excuses to delay. First, he claimed he was too busy with work. Then he started questioning the reliability of different testing facilities. When I finally found a reputable clinic and made an appointment, he tried to back out the morning of, saying he was coming down with something. His behavior made me increasingly suspicious. If he was so sure he wasn't Tommy's father, why was he fighting this so hard? When I voiced these concerns, he accused me of not trusting him and tried to turn it around on me, suggesting I was letting my family issues cloud my judgment. The day of the test, things got even more tense. James was practically shaking in the waiting room, and he barely spoke 2 words to me. When the nurse called his name, he turned to me and said, "If this ruins us, it's on you." That comment hit me hard. It felt like he was already preparing to blame me for whatever the results might show. The wait for the results was excruciating. I threw myself into work, trying to keep busy, but I couldn't focus. My colleagues noticed something was off, but I couldn't bring myself to explain the situation. How do you tell people that your engagement might be falling apart because your fiancé might have a secret child with your stepsister? The results came 3 days later. When I saw the email notification, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely open it. The test confirmed what I had been dreading: James is Tommy's biological father. I confronted James immediately, forwarding him the results. His response was not what I expected. Instead of showing remorse or trying to explain, he became defensive and angry. He accused me of ruining everything by insisting on the test. Then he dropped another bombshell. He admitted that he and Melissa had actually dated briefly before he met me, not just had a one-night stand as he'd previously claimed. I'm currently staying at a hotel. I couldn't bear to be in our house after discovering the extent of his lies. He's been calling and texting constantly, alternating between apologizing and telling me I'm overreacting. Last night, he sent a long message saying that the past doesn't matter, that we could work through this together, that he loves me and wants to build a future with me. But how can I build a future with someone who's been lying to me for years? This isn't just about Tommy anymore, it's about trust, honesty, and respect. Every time I think about going back home, I remember all the times he looked me in the eye and lied about knowing Melissa. In another development, Matt has started legal proceedings regarding the child support he's been paying. His lawyer is building a case against Melissa for fraud, and I've been asked to provide a statement about what happened at the engagement party. I keep thinking about Tommy in all of this. He's an innocent child caught in the middle of adult drama and lies. Part of me feels guilty for potentially disrupting his life, but another part knows that the truth needed to come out. I'll keep you updated as things develop. Right now, I'm just trying to take things one day at a time and figure out what I want my future to look like. Update 2. It's been 3 weeks since my last update, and things have taken an unexpected turn. The situation has become even more complicated than I could have imagined. Matt's legal team discovered something shocking during their investigation. It turns out Melissa has been collecting child support from another man simultaneously. Yes, you read that right. While she was getting monthly payments from Matt, she was also receiving money from a man named David, who had been actively involved in Tommy's life thinking he was the father. David, as it turns out, had been dating Melissa during the same period she was with both Matt and James. He's a successful business owner who has been paying her nearly $3,000 monthly in unofficial support, believing her story that she was struggling as a single mother. He had also been taking Tommy on weekend trips, attending his school events, and essentially acting as his father figure. When David learned about the situation through Matt's lawyers, he was devastated. He'd formed a deep bond with Tommy over the years, and finding out about Melissa's deception has hit him hard. What's more interesting is that Tommy calls him daddy, and sees him as his primary father figure. The legal implications are staggering. Melissa is now facing charges of fraud for collecting multiple child support payments under false pretenses. The courts are taking this very seriously, and there's talk of potential jail time. CPS has gotten involved due to concerns about Melissa's fitness as a parent. My mom and stepdad have temporarily taken custody of Tommy while the legal proceedings unfold. They're struggling with the situation, especially since they've discovered the extent of Melissa's deceptions. They keep hinting that I should step in and help with Tommy since I'm going to be part of his life anyway through James, but I've made it clear that's not going to happen. Speaking of James, he's been acting strangely since all this came to light. Instead of stepping up to take responsibility for his son, he's been distancing himself from the situation. He finally admitted that he knew about Tommy's paternity much earlier than he'd claimed. Apparently, Melissa had approached him years ago about it, but he chose to ignore her because he was focused on building his business. David has filed for custody of Tommy, citing his long-term involvement in the child's life and the strong bond they've developed. His lawyers have presented evidence of his consistent presence in Tommy's life, including birthday celebrations, school events, and regular weekend visits. The court seems to be taking his claims seriously, especially given the stability he can provide compared to Melissa's current situation. I've been subpoenaed to testify about what happened at the engagement party. My testimony could potentially impact both the fraud case against Melissa and the custody proceedings. It's a position I never wanted to be in, but I know I have to tell the truth. Through all of this, I can't help but feel a mix of emotions. While I feel vindicated that Melissa's lies are finally catching up with her, I'm heartbroken for Tommy. He's the innocent victim in all of this, and his whole world is being turned upside down. My relationship with James is effectively over, though we haven't officially announced it yet. His repeated lies and failure to take responsibility have shown me who he really is. The engagement ring sits in its box on my dresser, a reminder of what could have been if things had been different. I'm meeting with David's lawyers tomorrow to discuss my statement. They believe my testimony about the engagement party and James's admission of paternity could help strengthen David's case for custody. At this point, I just want what's best for Tommy, and from what I've seen and heard, that might be a life with David, who has proven himself to be a real father in all the ways that matter. Update 3, it's been 6 months since my last update, and I can finally say there's some closure to this whole situation. A lot has happened, and I want to share the final outcomes with everyone who supported me through this journey. First, the custody battle has been resolved. After extensive hearings and evaluations, the court awarded full custody to David. The judge's decision was primarily based on the stable environment David could provide and, more importantly, the strong emotional bond he shares with Tommy. The court-appointed child psychologist's report heavily emphasized how Tommy sees David as his primary father figure. What really sealed the decision was an incident that occurred during one of the supervised visits between Tommy and Melissa. She had a complete breakdown, screaming about how everyone had conspired against her. Tommy was terrified, and it took hours for the social workers to calm him down. After that, her supervised visitation rights were severely restricted. Speaking of Melissa, her legal troubles have reached their conclusion. She was found guilty of fraud for her child support scheme but managed to avoid jail time. Instead, she received 2 years of probation and was ordered to repay both Matt and David. She's also been mandated to attend therapy and parenting classes if she wants to maintain any visitation rights. The most revealing moment came during her court testimony. Under pressure, she finally admitted that she had orchestrated the entire engagement party scene after discovering that James had started making significant money with his tech company. She thought she could force him into providing financial support by publicly exposing him. When asked about collecting support from multiple men, she broke down and claimed she did it because she was desperate and afraid of ending up alone. My relationship with my family has been strained but is slowly healing. My mom and stepdad initially tried to pressure me into keeping the family together by suggesting I work things out with James for Tommy's sake. It took several tense conversations for them to understand that I wouldn't sacrifice my own happiness for their idealized version of family harmony. But the most significant revelation came last month. Melissa showed up at my apartment unannounced, clearly distressed. She confessed that she had been harboring resentment toward me since our parents' marriage because she felt I had a perfect life she could never achieve. She admitted to deliberately targeting James after finding out about his growing success, hoping to secure some financial stability for herself. The most shocking part was when she revealed that James had known about Tommy's paternity for years. Apparently, when they ran into each other at that first family dinner, she had pulled him aside and told him about her suspicions. They had secretly done a paternity test back then, which confirmed he was the father. James had chosen to keep quiet and avoid responsibility, afraid it would interfere with his growing business and our relationship. This final betrayal confirmed that ending things with James was the right decision. A man who could knowingly abandon his child and build a relationship on lies is not someone I want to spend my life with. As for Tommy, he's thriving in his new life with David. I recently saw them at a local park. David was teaching him how to ride a bike, and Tommy was laughing, carefree and happy. It made me realize that sometimes the people who choose to be our family are more important than those connected by blood or marriage. I've moved to a new apartment and started focusing on my career again. The whole experience has taught me valuable lessons about trust, honesty, and the importance of facing the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. While I'm not ready to start dating again, I feel stronger and more clear-headed about what I want in a partner and in life. For anyone going through similar family drama, remember that exposing the truth, while painful, is usually better than living with lies. Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the best outcomes, even if we can't see it in the moment. Thank you all for your support throughout this journey. Your advice and kind words helped me navigate one of the most challenging periods of my life.